So
welcome. This is
here
the Drupal
the
usability
issue.
meeting for March 19th, 2021. I'm sorry I forgot to mention that last week that this meeting is scheduled in US Eastern time. So for a lot of the people who regularly join, it's an hour earlier because of daylight savings time. So I'm Benji Fisher, moderating the meeting, and also present are Lauri Escola, Anmol Goel, and Antonia. Thank you all for joining. And Lauri is going to start us off.
Yes. So in Drupal core, we have this initiative where we are trying to replace jQuery UI components with modern libraries. This particular issue is to replace jQuery UI resizable. The issue number for this is 3201835. So this is about the jQuery UI resizable component, which is used, for example, by dialogues. And what the jQuery UI resizable allows users to do is to resize the size of the dialogue. And we are using it, for example, pretty heavily on the off-canvas dialogue. So you can change the size of the dialogue depending on your preference. In theory, it is also possible to have the modals and other types of dialogues be resizable, but I don't think we are using that anywhere in core as far as I'm aware.
I believe the tokens dialog used to be resizable.
Where is that?
Anywhere you want to view the tokens for a specific entity, maybe if you have the meta tag module, or I don't know, there's so many corners in Drupal. I've seen it, but I can't think of an easy one now.
Meta tag module, so we could test that.
Or path auto.
Yeah,
that's another place where tokens are used.
I think there's an active bug right now that the dialogue, it jumps to the bottom of the page if you try to resize it. But it used to work normally before. However, I would at this point I would question whether the jQuery resizable is used everywhere where dialogues are resized.
I'm going to install path auto using Composer, so I get all of the dependencies as well. So in the meanwhile, as this is installing, the proposal on this issue, or the question on this issue, is whether we need the resizing on dialogues other than the off canvas. And so the proposed solution here is, I'm not sure, is that explained anywhere? Is to support that for the off-canvas dialog, but then other dialogues would not be resizable, at least by default. Antonia, since you seem to be using some dialogues that are some other dialogues than the off-canvas that are using resize, is that something that you're using or see users use commonly?
I do actually. I regularly resize the tokens dialog because, well, it's not the usual case, but sometimes you have to do work on some legacy sites that are huge and have a lot of stuff in there, and then you also get a bunch of tokens. And if you're familiar, you probably are with the tokens dialog. It's like details elements that you can expand and collapse, and some of them have like 50 tokens in there if you expand them. And instead of scrolling in a very, very small window, it's mostly more comfortable to just resize the dialog and then increase the scrolling container this way.
So Larry, just to clarify, this is for resizing dialogues. Is this different from resizing text areas?
Yeah, so this is resizing dialogues specifically, not text areas. The issue.
Okay.
Let me, where's the, is it here?
Yes.
Yeah, it should be there.
Mm.
So where do I get the dialogue? Should be here.
Yeah, so
You have
add a
to-
pattern.
Yes.
And yeah, choose something.
Oh, here.
And then in that path pattern box, it allows tokens. Oh, you got it.
Okay, so this is resizable, and
this is what Antonio was describing.
Right.
so I guess the question is then, could it, is the resizing here the critical piece, or is it more to do with that the dialogue is too small when it's first opened?
It is rather small, yeah. I think it would help if there were some site builders around. Maybe they can share what value they see in the resizing, in the ability to resize the dialogues.
Just offhand, it seems like a pretty useful thing to have. That, you know, there are drawbacks to making it bigger by default.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think the reason why it was proposed for removal is that the library is relatively complex. We looked at it, and then it seemed like it might be a feature that is not used very often. But if it is an important feature for some users, it might not make sense to remove it. So I guess the question is, do we have any thoughts on how should we figure that out? If it is something that if people are using and feel like they need.
May I ask what the plan is for the off-canvas dialog? I mean, as far as I can understand, we want to get rid of jQuery UI resizable. Should it be replaced by a vanilla JS plugin for the off-canvas dialog, or how will this be handled exactly?
Yes, so for the off-canvas, I think the proposal was to come with something that is specific to the off-canvas. And it would be a little bit simpler because it can be only resized in one direction. But this one can be resized to two directions.
Okay, well, this might be a rather pragmatic proposal, but is it, I mean, would it be legit to just open the tokens in another window instead of a dialog? Maybe there's just like a route for all the available tokens we can open in a new browser window, and users can resize that if they wish.
In other words, don't use
Yeah, I mean,
dialogues.
Because it's rather small, really. I mean, I think everyone
Yeah.
would resize
the
this.
idea is that you could see the tokens while you are.
Right. Yeah. Oh, should we just open an off canvas with this as well?
Well, that's an interesting suggestion. I mean, of course, this was implemented before the off canvas was there.
Mm-hmm.
How much work is it to rewrite something that pops up a dialog?
I'm sorry, you were cutting out a little bit last time you talked.
I said this token browser was implemented long before the off canvas area was available. And I wonder how hard it would be to rewrite it so that it uses the off canvas area.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be too difficult, actually, because of it's still a dialogue. So it could be a small change. I guess that the difficulty is that it does take a bit of space horizontally, but maybe they could resize the off canvas to be able to fit this, because it should be possible, at least based on this. So here we are creating different size of the off canvas. Yeah, maybe that's what they should do, or what they could do.
If we do that, I think that's the sort of disruptive change that we would want to make with a major version update. Give module maintainers a chance to know that in a sense, we're almost deprecating dialogues except in the off canvas area.
Well, just resizing them.
Right. So we're telling them if you want a resizable dialogue, then it is going to be in the off canvas area, or you're going to implement it yourself.
Yeah.
So it's not actually deprecation, but it sort of feels like a deprecation to me because I'm lazy and I don't want to implement it myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deprecation of one API related to dialogues. And some people might have to do a bit of work to get over that.
So is the replacement of, or is the deprecation of jQuery UI in general planned for Drupal 10 anyway?
Yes, I think it would happen in Drupal 10. Anyway, I don't know if it's discussed on the issue or not, but I agree with the assessment that you made that it would have to happen on a major release. So I think that's how it would go.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I joined 5 minutes ago because apparently we changed from daylight savings time at different points in March. So I wasn't expecting the meeting to be on now, but anyway, never mind. I was looking at this and I thought I would note that because I've implemented in modules I've worked on, I've had to implement the token browser, and it's from a module maintainer's perspective, it's basically, if I remember correctly, just element that you put onto, like a render element, and it creates it for you. So I don't know if there would be a massive amount of work for module maintainers if there was a change in how it renders, because they should all be using that UI element.
I see. So it would be just a change in the token module itself, and any modules using it would likely be able to keep their code intact.
That would
Yeah.
be great.
Well, if that's the case, good job whoever implemented that. So it sounds like we're not confident on that approach, but it sounds like there's like not at least strong sense of that this would be required to be something that we have.
Yeah, we're not going to come up with a final answer in this meeting, but I think that's a good direction to consider.
Yeah, that's a new consideration that has not been brought up on the issue. Yeah, so I think it's valuable. It's as it is.
What is a current implementation or use of the off canvas? What's an example in core?
Setting stray would be
Right,
one.
so, yeah.
And
I'm wondering about what kind of user experience rationale there could be. I mean, it kind of feels like it feels good. Like when I open the web inspector or inspect an element, it sort of like opens off canvas, right? You can probably also make it a separate window, but either to the right or to the bottom of the screen, this drawer pops open, and it gives me access to, well, the guts of the page. And here I open, like, it's not necessarily the guts of the page I'm looking at, but yeah, it's quite it's a bunch of stuff that I can use on the page I opened this on. I'm wondering what if maybe we don't need it, right? It could still be a choice to. But what is the difference in use cases when to use a dialog and when to use a off canvas? It kind of feels right for this token browser to I can imagine it living here like this settings tray does. I don't know. Just thinking about how we may come up with a rationale for when to choose which, right?
so I think the purpose of the off-canvas dialog is that you can have the context available on the left side, on the left side of the dialog, which is exactly what they are doing with this. So if we open this again, we can see it opens on the right side of the page, on the bottom right side of the page.
Ah, they even, yeah, right. It already thinks like a settings tray. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for reference, Layout Builder also makes heavy use of off-canvas dialog. And that's another example where you want when you're in that dialogue, you still want to have access to, as was put, what's on the left. And I think this is a good use case for that as well, because this is an excellent use case, because what you're doing is when you're interacting with the token picker, it is inserting those onto what's fields on the left, and you might want to still have that open and be able to click around and move the tokens around. And quite often you do want to do that, actually. And one thing I would also note is that if I remember correctly, the off-canvas dialog can be when it's opened, it can be told at what width. It doesn't have to be at the default width that like Layer Builder and Sentence Tree use. It can have a wider width, which I think would work well for token in the case of token, and have, as you can see, that kind of width that we're seeing right now.
Yeah. I was about to confuse dialogues with modals. So this is not a modal, right? Not all dialogues are modals. Of course, modals explicitly do not interact with the page they're shown over. So this is not a modal. Never mind. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing about like a dialogue. Often, especially if you're working on a small screen, right? When you open the token browser, I often find myself having to drag it out of the way sometimes, whereas if it's rendered in the off-canvas dialog, that's not a problem, because the rendering of the page takes care of that for me.
Right, and dialogues are basically, just trying to tease out more of the possible rationale. Dialogues are about zooming in on a part of the form or screen you're working on and getting to more details of it. I'm thinking about views, right? So you can change the settings for this field you're going to use in this view. And if you're going to change the settings of that one field, then that stuff opens up in a dialog, and maybe even modal at that time. Then you do your thing, configuring the details of that one element, and then return to the screen. Whereas here, yeah, it's still operating on a single field, right? So that's in that case similar. No, it's not really working.
I'm thinking perhaps we should rewrite the views UI to use the off-canvas area.
Yeah, that's as a thought exercise. Does that make sense, right? Does that work? Does that make the workflow maybe more predictable or usable? Yeah.
I wonder if that's an interesting candidate as an experimental Views UI module, because that'd be a big pattern change. It'd be interesting to see how people react to that. I sort of think that might be a good idea, to at least do it as an experiment.
What is it but a settings tray?
There's an issue to modernize the Views UI.
Yeah. From 19. No. Yeah.
Okay, we're at the half hour. I'd sort of like to move on to another issue. Can we wrap up this one?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can write a comment on the issue based on what we discussed today.
Thank you. And I guess the other issue that we'd like to look at today is 3203618, the new content creation menu proposal. Would someone like to bring that up and share their screen? And while you're doing that, for the sake of the recording, I'll mention that we've been joined by several more people. So Roy Schulten, Aaron McHale, Christina Chumias, Gabor Hotzi, and Uffer Schall. So thank you all for joining us. And I'm sorry that I forgot to mention last week the daylight savings time shift. So Roy or Christina, would
Yes,
you like to?
yes, I will.
Thank you.
Am I sharing only this browser window, or sorry? I moved to a different browser window. Are you still looking at?
We see the tabs.
Okay, thanks. Right, so 3203618 is the issue we're want to introduce to you today. And it proposes a new content creation, content management menu idea. We is Christina, Sasha, Laurie, and Roy. And what we've been, okay, let's frame the problem. So this is the diagram of the core, a simplified diagram of the current core toolbar, right? We have a few items in the top black bar, and then there's a second white strip of items if you have the horizontal layout, which has entries for content, structure, appearance, extent, configuration, etc. All these items contain multiple sub-items, and even those could have additional sub-subs, etc. So it's a simplified diagram, but you get the idea, right? And this approach, this information architecture, by design, was created to catch them all. So to be able to give a space to all the core things, and of course all the additional concept items you might add through extending it with modules, and also when those modules also have configuration or structure items to add, they can do so and add themselves within these top level categories, and sometimes big modules or even distributions add top level items as well. So this current information architecture is, like I said, catch them all by design, and which makes quite a bit of sense for people with all the permissions, right? The developer or the site builder who is preparing a site for people to use. That makes sense. People sometimes install additional modules to make these sub-items fly out menus, but they can get everywhere, and they have multiple items living everywhere that they need to be able to access. So that's fine. But now consider a typical, not that there is a typical, but let's still think of a typical content creator and maybe editor, maintainer, who has a role as a content editor or maintainer, so it has only permissions to access a very specific, and depending on the exact permission, but a relatively narrow set of sub-items from this whole collection of possible items. Of course, they don't see the top level sections, they don't have access to. So, but let's say a content creator can create a couple of content types, and maybe administer comments, and maybe add some custom blocks or configure menus, right? Maybe tweak some settings somewhere, maybe can change something in people and access reports. And where those dots are is not necessarily the most important bit, but they have a certain set of items available to them. In this hypothetical example, that would give them a toolbar that only shows those items they have access to, ideally. And in this case, that means that this person has access to 9 menu items split out over 4 categories. And especially in the story of in the separation between content and structure, there often is like a clash, a mental clash. Why are these different, right? Creating a new custom block or creating a new menu is most of the times also perceived as creating content. So why do I need to go here to do these things, etc. So this is a result of the current setup, right? We give people fewer permissions. They have access to only those items in the admin, but we don't. But the items are where they are, so yeah, people have to jump around to get to things. We think that's a problem, at the very least a challenge for the editor UX. And we would like to look at possible ways to improve this situation. And so if we continue the analysis, what could be a potential solution is, can we provide a new, or can we find a space where those links, people with, let's say, the editor or content manager role, those items, could we group those items into a new space somewhere? I don't want to call it the menu just says, right? It could be, can we group those items because you are an editor or because you have access to the editor toolbox? We show all the things, all those things in a single space together. Because that would already change a lot, right? If I can create my content types and the block and the menu item from the same starting point, that could improve the situation. So, conceptual mockup. What would it mean to, if this were a separate menu or a separate space? Could it then indeed provide a shortcut or a select list of items that you can create new ones of in maybe a drop-down list? And again, this list of items is geared towards content management. So if I can create new items, then these are the spaces where you can find the existing items and manage them, right? Make sticky, unpublish, etc. Workflow stuff. And on a third level, and then there's the settings bit, which I could still have access to more things, right? So we need to think about how to make a bridge and link to the other things you might also have access to, because you're not only a content editor, but you also have site admin permissions. So what is the link or the jump to the current toolbar? Help, and maybe that user and help links are also part of this. That's so far. This proposal is not the same as shortcuts. Shortcuts are per user, and for the current thinking is that this menu should not necessarily be per user, but maybe either admin managed, so somebody manages what's in the content manager toolbox, or we could look at deriving it from the actual roles and permissions we assign to this thing. So show only those admin items that the content manager role has access to, for example. So assumption is that the menu items are fixed, maybe derived from role permissions, and then shortcuts could still be that an extra special on top. So even if you could create 20 content types, there could still be those 3 that you create most of the time. So maybe shortcuts could be integrated into this new space. All right. That's the not even that short walkthrough, but we have, oops, posted this idea in a summary here in 3203618. Oh, right, and here's the conceptual, even the more high-level space, high-level model of the parts that are in this. The main elements within the editor toolbar would be give me access to the things I can create, give me access to the content stuff I can manage, administer, give me a place to jump to all those other things that are not in here, help account. Basically, this diagram, maybe the bottom part, I would be interested to hear if people recognize this as an issue. Then we, of course, want to hear if this is a potential good idea to actually implement. And then, of course, and we will link the Google Doc here after this discussion. If this is a good idea, then we have, of course, stuff to work through to really finalize and come up with an implementation plan for it. I'll stop talking for now. Maybe Laurie, Christina, Sasha want to add something. Otherwise, questions, ideas? Thanks.
Thank you for presenting this. You have explained that way better than me.
I have a question. This menu is going to be an additional menu, right? We're not talking about revolutionizing the existing admin toolbar.
Good question. For now, we've conceptualized it as a new thing because the current information architecture of because this is large, right? And this is there is issues with this information architecture, but they are well pretty hard to change because they have what do you say? That has consequences, I think large consequences. So for now, it's the idea is to provide it as a separate space. One other thought we had, could it be just, could we group those in that first content section?
I like that idea very much. I think one of the most difficult thing to teach people is where do I see a list of content? And this new way even make that simple basic task so easy. And if it takes over even the existing menu, I think it's gonna be a fairly smooth transition.
Yeah, so one of the discussions that we had here is that basically we can't solve things for everybody, and we have two main users that we have to take into account. On one side is, yes, the content user or the content editor or the content manager or whatever. But on the other side, we can't forget the site builder, the developer, that it's someone that is going to use Drupal anyway. So just getting rid of the current structure for toolbar seemed like a major change, and I don't think we want to go that far. And actually, just creating these new ones is actually what made more sense, because actually we could. So in the discussions, we went even a little bit further, and we even said how we could actually implement that on a visual way. And we thought that maybe a solution close to what Jean is implemented with a left sidebar that, well, interacts in a more modern way could make sense. So that's why having something completely new made a lot of sense.
So yeah, the approach we took here is to provide a different space where we could provide a different view on a given subset of admin links. If we were to solve it within the toolbar, then, I mean, it would, I don't think that's what you're proposing, but I don't think it would make much sense to move blocks to content only for content editors, right? It would then be a actual change to move the creation of blocks to content, right? Not make that
exactly.
role.
Exactly, yeah. And also something that I think you mentioned that, but anyway, so a lot of times we just don't want to move things from toolbar. We want to create a new menu, meaning that we will have new items on this new menu. So we will be a user that has access to both menus will be able to access taxonomy or menus, for example, from both the toolbar and this new menu. The question is, how would they coexist? And I don't think we have the answer because we are not sure if this is the correct path. And that's why we are actually we're asking for feedback.
Yeah, so do we agree that this is a problem, this top, that we could improve things here? This example, right, with 9 links spread out over 5 admin categories.
Yeah, I think everyone agrees that the navigation in the Drupal admin UI, it's hard and you need better ways to do it. I have 2 sort of opposite suggestions. So one is in the conservative direction. Maybe what we really want here is a more customizable toolbar so that you can have different profiles and assign a profile to a role. So rather than the permission use the admin toolbar, we'd have something more granular where you can use the content editor toolbar, or you can use the site builder toolbar, or you can use the administrator toolbar, and make it easier to to rearrange things so that a content editor would not just see 9 things in 4 different submenus, but would actually see a different menu structure than the site admin would. So that's the conservative direction. And the other direction is that maybe we should have something more creative than menu navigation, drop-down menus and branched menus. Maybe we should totally rethink how someone moves around the back end. And I wish I had some really creative ideas to suggest there rather than just say, let's be creative. But
you mean for site builders or you mean for content authors?
For both.
I think you're challenging the at the roots of how an information architecture for this admin might otherwise work. Yeah.
So I think this is a really important discussion to have. It's timely because we have been talking for a while now about a new content editor role in standard, and also the most recent proposals around also content manager role. I think there is a use case for and I sort of posted this in the issue before the meeting, but there's a use case for having a more contextually aware toolbar. For instance, and this isn't just limited to content editor. So for instance, I'm working on a project where we want to be able to use the toolbar for non-administrative users. We're building a sort of like an interface that is more of like we're using like the Gin theme and the Gin toolbar. So we want to be able to have, for instance, and it's using a commerce-based site. So we want customers to be able to have a separate toolbar experience than administrators or staff, if you like. So one of the examples of how you might solve that is that you have, and kind of as Benji said, actually, you have the toolbar where can have more than just the manage menu, and you can assign menus to particular roles. So you could say, well, if you have this role, you see this menu in a toolbar. And I'm just posting a link to a contribute module in the Zoom chat, toolbar menu. And that does a pretty good job at that. If you don't mind bringing up that module, actually, Roy.
I'm
on the screen.
Working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this module, it enables you to have multiple menus on the toolbar, and it kind of does what that. And this is effectively a proof of concept for, I think, what we actually need in core is a more flexible toolbar module in core that can respond to these contextual environments when you need it. And also, in theory, like we could have, because of the way modules define their links. So for instance, like the node module defines some links for listing content and things. Like those links could exist in multiple menus. They don't have to be in just one menu. So you could have like I'm just trying to think of a good example, like the add content could exist in both the manage and the content menu. And the last thing I'll also add is there's also an issue to provide an add button on the toolbar for adding,
Yes.
which I also think is really worth exploring, to add where you would basically go and you would get the content add screen from the node module. So I think that would also be worth, again, probably quite timely looking at.
Yeah, and I think some of these suggestions are compatible and are similar to what we're trying to do here, and some probably not. I mean, where we deliberately left open where this thing lives, right? It could be the first entry in the toolbar, right? And it could be, right, like this custom new item that was added here, and well, looks like it then follows the existing pattern, right, of showing its subs, and then maybe this little special menu could also have a different visual treatment. There's lots of angles to explore, right? I'm here. We were also thinking, well, if creation is the grouping aspect, then we should feel free to also add new video, right, in the same list, and add new taxonomy term or add new user account in the same list, because we are grouping by task and not by type of thing.
Yeah, something else also that we discussed in one of the meetings discussing with this is that maybe it's just a validation that we did for ourselves based on our experiences, that most of the site builders or developers like the toolbar the way it is, or maybe they install extensions for that, like the admin toolbar or something that you were showing, but users, they actually don't like this way of navigating through the admin interface and the way that Jean shows the menu. It's something that they would expect based on experiences that they might have on other interfaces, that, like the ease of use that you might have with the left sidebar, like, for example, Jira or something like that, something that this kind of user, based on their experience with other tools, it's closer to what they are expecting. Meaning, again, that we have two completely different users, the ones that are building the site with a huge amount of links on the toolbar, and the other ones that have a different structure and experience, I would say. That's why we were basing also that, because with this new item, we could start from scratch and implement a new behavior or a new interaction for this new menu. And if we have to rebuild the toolbar, it could mean that we have to keep both the toolbar being able to work on the top and with drop downs and at the same time be on the left. And it's kind of making things so much more complex. So yeah, I don't know.
The Gin toolbar module is also a pretty good, almost like case study or example of a toolbar that can, because it just builds on the existing core toolbar, but it allows it to be positioned on the top or on the left and styled differently. So I think what you're saying as well, I'm reminding you that sometimes, you know, something that the Drupal administrative menu has been the way it is. It's okay, it's not always been the toolbar, but the administrative menu itself has been in that structure for as long as I can remember. You know, go back to Drupal 6, it wasn't a toolbar, but it was more or less the same structure, right? So I think there's an element of like people who are Drupal site builders and things are probably really used to the way it is, but like end users of sites are they're not necessarily Drupal people, they're not used to that. So yeah, I think that kind of illustrates the conflict there of sometimes we should break things because or just because something's been around for a long time doesn't mean it's like always the best way to have it, but people are so used to it. Like, how do you change that experience without it being such a jarring experience for most people?
Exactly, that's what we did.
I fully agree.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, that's the problem with URLs, right? That setting screen lives at this URL, and that's the current URL pattern is like, yeah, it's a hierarchical tree, right? The information architecture is a tree. That doesn't mean that the UI should represent that tree. And I mean, there's certainly also flaws in the actual information architecture, right? People showing up into places, for example. Appearance as a top-level item has been criticized or questioned. So that what I would think and what I think here, what I would agree with is that the current information architecture should not necessarily be leading in what we should not frame or limit or whatever we think we would want to apply. Is Gabor in the house? He was retweeting a React decoupled UI from the Acquia toolkit the other day, which sounded like something that was basically selecting existing admin UI items and presenting them in a different remix, right? In a different dashboard or screen. I mean, for me, it makes sense or it helps to decouple the thinking on what kind of UI we want to present and the actual information architecture that's underlying. Changing the information architecture would move things around, right? But that doesn't result in a changed user experience. And I think it's in the remixing and bringing together of workflows, etc., that we can truly improve things, right? I don't know. Information architecture is not the actual user interface that we need to come up with. So, even if the media library or the media module places its own create image link still on its in its media sub-tab and has the blue button there to create a new video, we should feel free, for example, to here have a grouping principle that bundles all the things you can create, and no matter what type of thing it is, but it's a thing, so we show it in the same place as the other things you can create.
On that specific point, actually, in the because the issue I mentioned earlier about the issue to add an add item, kind of confusing name, but in that issue, it was talked about, and there was screenshots of what would happen if you had add links for every bundle of every entity type. So like not just Node, but as you've got there like media and taxonomy, and you'd very quickly get this really unwieldy menu. So a compromise that I proposed, and it was that like if you think about what you're adding, so generally when you're adding a page or a node, right, the user, like node is a really kind of weird Drupal term for what we're adding. But it's, you know, you're adding an article or you're adding a page or a blog post, like you're adding those bundles. But with pretty much everything else in Drupal core, like if you go to add a media item, like the user can relate to that. They're like, oh, I'm adding a piece of media. That's an image, a video, like, or I'm adding something to taxonomy. Like those are much more relatable things. So you might want to have, it might be that the structure makes sense where for things like in an add or a create menu, the top level of that menu would have each of the bundles from Node. So like article, basic page, but for other things like media and things, you would just have a add media or add taxonomy or, you know, something like that.
Right, a site may have a person content type or may have a person taxonomy type, and the content editor probably doesn't care. So that what's currently the top level distinction is something that we might want to hide. We are running over time, and I don't want to cut off discussion, but I do want to respect people's schedules. Shall we keep going a little longer, or shall we maybe think about it and come back to this at a future meeting?
I gotta leave to another meeting, sorry.
Yeah, I don't think this is something we're going to solve right now. So.
No, we're not going to solve Drupal in 1 hour.
Especially not the week after daylight savings time, where
apparently
the US are a little sleep deprived.
My daylight savings doesn't start till tomorrow, so, or the day after. So you get me sleep deprived next week. Or you guys have all recovered.
If any of you would like to keep the conversation going on the issue, it will help having a lot of thoughts already in there for the next time we discuss this. It will help a lot. And if you want to share this with other people that might have also other thoughts, that would be really useful. Because we're on the step, we want to validate that this is actually something we want to pursue, that there's other people interested on this happening. So that could be super useful.
Yeah, one last thing to note is that Sasha, the maintainer, creator of Gin module, and involved with this proposal as well, last week was able to join a call where distribution maintainers check in on each other, right? Have a meeting to coordinate whatever challenges they have as distribution maintainers. And he quickly presented basically the short version of this idea, and he got some initial positive response there as well. And we will, they offered to help us further validate or come up with use cases for how they currently solve it or would like to solve, or what the actual problem is and how they go about things right now. But yeah, any feedback is appreciated, of course. I think Christina will add the more extensive Google Doc link to the issue, maybe?
Yeah, I can do that now that we've presented it to everybody.
Yes.
Okay, I got it.
That's...
Thanks all.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, okay. End of meeting. Right, cool. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye, thanks.
Yo.
Bye bye.
Hey.
All right.